The sound of a phone screen shattering on marble was the sound of my career ending. All because some kid decided to turn my brother's memory into a joke. On hallowed ground, where people come to honor the fallen, he threw a soda can at my feet and laughed at a pain he couldn't possibly understand. Now, his father is spending millions to paint me as a monster, an unhinged soldier. They want to strip me of everything: my career, my honor, and even the memory of Owen. But they made one fatal mistake. They dug too deep, and what they found might not bury me. It might just bury their own son. The question now is, when the truth is crueler than the initial insult, who does justice really belong to? My name is Silas Thorne, a sentinel at the eternal dais. Discipline is the only thing I trust, the only thing that keeps me upright each day. I don't show emotion. I don't allow for error. This duty doesn't require thought. It requires perfection. Inside each of the 21 steps is an oath. An oath to my brother, Owen. Today marks the 5th anniversary of his death. Even ironclad discipline has a hard time hiding that kind of grief. Amid the solemn atmosphere, my attention was pulled, not by a threat, but by a dissonance. First was the man in the expensive suit, whose only physical presence was here while his mind was glued to his phone screen. Beside him, his wife hid behind sunglasses, her posture radiating fatigue and boredom, and wedged between them was the source of the irritation: a kid, about 13, constantly fidgeting. The three of them weren't here to remember. They were here just to say they were here. The kid's voice cut through the quiet. So boring. What's so great about watching some guy walk back and forth? The kid's voice broke my concentration. It wasn't just noise. It worked its way into my head like a hairline crack. I kept walking, trying to hold the rhythm, and then he made his move. The dry thud of the soda can hitting the stone caught my attention. A sticky, dirty splash hit the perfect surface of my boots. My anger didn't flare up. It crystallized, cold, dense, and sharp. On any other day, this might have just been the act of a stupid kid. But today, Owen's day, it was a clear act of desecration. I kept walking. 21 steps. Turn. Perfect. The kid burst out laughing, clearly proud of his little joke. He didn't stop there. He stepped over the rope, violating the sacred space, his phone held high, ready for a selfie. His smirk, the way he turned sacrifice into a cheap backdrop. That was the line. Thousands of hours of training to make my body a tool for my duty. To eliminate all emotion, it all became a distant concept. My movement wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. One step, arm out, quick and clean. My white-gloved fingers closed around the phone before the kid could even register it. I didn't throw it. I just let go. The sound of the screen shattering on the marble. Shattering. The sound was dry, definitive. It wasn't a gunshot, but it said everything. I had crossed the line. I returned to my post. Continued walking. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, I knew I had just failed. Not the military, but Owen. The sound of that failure hadn't even faded when the heels of Sergeant Miller clicked on the stone behind me. He was the relief guard, always ready for an emergency, and I had just become an emergency. Miller said nothing. He didn't have to. As we drew level, his eyes behind his sunglasses said it all. Your watch is over. We switched places with a precise movement, a silent ritual we'd practiced hundreds of times. But this time, it was real. 2 military police officers appeared, walking silently on either side of me. They didn't touch me, but their presence was heavier than handcuffs. As we moved, The crowd parted. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I was no longer the sentinel. I was the problem that needed to be handled. My eyes scanned the mess I had created. The Price family no longer looked smug. The father, Alistair, had his phone out, but this time not for browsing. His voice was low and urgent. I didn't need to hear to know who was on the other end. A lawyer. It's always the first move for people like him. The mother, Isabel, was trying to shield her son, a panicked look on her face. And the kid, Jackson, he wasn't laughing anymore. His face was pale as he saw federal officers approaching. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving only a 3-year-old kid realizing the world wasn't his personal playground. They took me to a small room, 4 white walls and a steel table. Captain Petrova walked in, shutting the door behind her. The click of the lock was decisive. She placed a file on the table. "Do you understand the severity of this situation, Thorne?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "Yes, Captain. You assaulted a minor civilian. You destroyed private property. And most importantly, you abandoned your post while on duty. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I was silent for a moment. Excuses were pointless. "No, Captain." She nodded, as if she expected that answer. "You are suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of a formal investigation. Surrender your insignia and await orders in your quarters." "Understood?" "Understood." I walked out of that room no longer a sentinel, just Silas Thorne. The war outside, the war of lawyers and media had begun. But for me, the real war was on the inside. He had broken protocol for Owen, but in doing so, I had also broken the oath I made to him. And that was a failure no ceremony could hide. The silence in my room was a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. I didn't need to turn on the TV or go online to know. The whispers in the hallway, the sideways glances from my fellow soldiers. I had become a story. The call came in the afternoon. "Colonel Kendrick wants to see you." Colonel Kendrick's office was neat and orderly, everything in its proper place. It was the world I belonged to, a world of rules and discipline. But now, I felt like an outsider. He didn't ask me to sit. He just turned the computer monitor on his desk towards me. It was filled with clips and news headlines. The video, shot from a dozen different angles. Sensational. Dramatic. "This is the world out there," Thorne, the colonel said, his voice even. "To half of them, you're a hero. To the other half, you're a menace, an out-of-control soldier who attacked a child." He turned the monitor back. "I don't care what the world out there thinks. I care about the discipline of this unit. A formal investigation is underway." "I understand, Colonel." "No, you don't," he cut me off. "The Price family's lawyers have been in contact. They don't just want compensation. They want a court-martial. They want your career." He folded his arms, his gaze sharpening. "And they've already started. Their team is tearing through your service record. Every mission, every report, every commendation. They're looking for anything, no matter how small, to prove you're unstable." I stood there, silent. I was prepared to face the consequences from the military. That was justice. But this was something else. This was a fight. They didn't just want me punished. They wanted me destroyed, to paint me as the villain so their son could be the victim. "Do you have anything to say, Thorne?" the colonel asked. This time, my answer was different. "Yes, Colonel," I said, my voice steady. "I took an action, and I will take responsibility for it. But I will not let them rewrite my story." He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Good, because this fight isn't going to happen online. It's going to happen in a hearing room." Leaving his office, I realized this whole mess had shifted. It was no longer just about my personal failure to Owen. Now, my honor, my years of service, and even his memory were all on the line, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me. The next few days passed in a state of tense anticipation. I was confined to my quarters, my time revolving around preparations for the hearing. A military lawyer was assigned to me, a young captain named Evans. He was efficient, professional, but I knew our chances were slim. The video evidence was damning. Meanwhile, I heard about the Price's strategy. Not from the news, but through the barracks grapevine. Their lawyers had advised the family to show remorse. A PR move. They wanted the kid, Jackson, to look more like a victim than an instigator. I was told the kid had been forced to study the history of the days. An assignment to perform in court, nothing more. I pictured him in some lavish library, flipping through a few pages with a bored look, just to satisfy the legal team. But then, something unexpected happened. Captain Evans called me one evening. "Thorne, there's something you should know." His voice was a little strange. The Price legal team just requested access to the records of service members killed in action from Meridian over the last 10 years. "For what?" I asked. "I'm not sure. Maybe they're looking for some sob story for the kid to tell in court. A way to show he's learned his lesson. Just letting you know what they're up to." I hung up, a sick feeling rising in my gut. They were digging through the memories of the fallen, just to serve their little drama. The thought was repulsive. 2 days later, Evans called again. This time his voice was urgent. "They found him, Silas. They found Owen's file." Everything in me went still. "What do you mean?" "Owen's file is partially public, like all Kia's, and it includes a digitized document, a letter. That letter. Owen had written it before his last deployment. He hadn't mailed it. He'd left it in his footlocker, and the army sent it back with his things. A private letter, written to his 17-year-old brother. How did they get it?" My voice went cold. "It's part of the public record, Silas. They didn't do anything illegal. But the point is, they're using it." I didn't need to ask more. I knew what they were going to do. They would take my brother's last words, the most private and sacred thing I had, and turn them into a tool in a courtroom. They were going to use Owen against me. The cold anger I felt that day returned. But this time it wasn't vague. It had a clear target. They had crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. They had made this personal. I thought the Prices would use the letter as a weapon, that their lawyer would read it in court, trying to leverage my loss to prove I was unstable. I was prepared for that, but I was wrong. It didn't happen the way I expected. On a Saturday morning, 3 days before my hearing, I was in the laundry room of my barracks. It was the only place I could go without being noticed. The steady hum of the machines was a decent background noise. The door opened, and the kid, Jackson Price, walked in. He stood there, alone. No parents. No lawyers. He was in jeans and a t-shirt, looking small and out of place. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a visible anxiety. I said nothing, just watched him, waiting. He walked closer, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "You're Sergeant Thorne, right?" Yeah, I was prepared for a challenge, or a lawyer-coached apology. But what I got was neither. He took a deep breath. I read the letter. I clenched my fists. "So what?" "No, it's not what you think," he said quickly. "My lawyer wanted me to use it. But I didn't. I just wanted to say." He trailed off, looking at the floor. I went to the Veterans Center downtown. I raised an eyebrow, not following. "After I read your brother's letter, it wasn't what I thought. It was just normal. Like, he was just a brother. Like me." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. Not fear. Confusion. I talked to an old woman there, Mrs. Adeline Finch. She was a nurse in the war. She didn't tell stories about battles. She told me about the friends she lost, about having to write letters to their families. The kid held out the crumpled paper. It was a printout of Owen's letter. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice small but clear. "Not because I got caught, but because of him. Because of this letter." I didn't know. He placed the paper on top of a washing machine, then turned and walked quickly out of the room, leaving me alone with the humming machines and my brother's last words. I stood there for a long time. This wasn't a stunt. A 1-3-year-old kid couldn't fake that kind of clumsy sincerity. He came here on his own, went to the vet's center on his own, faced me on his own. I picked up the paper, looked at the familiar handwriting. For the first time since that day, the cold, hard wall inside of me developed a crack. His action didn't erase what happened, but it changed everything. My hearing was first. The room was formal, cold, filled with high-ranking uniforms. Colonel Kendrick presided. On the other side, I saw the Price family with their legal team. Jackson wouldn't look at me. The Price's lawyer presented the evidence, the video, witness statements. They painted a clear picture, an out-of-control soldier, a potential threat. Then it was my turn. Captain Evans had prepared a detailed defense, highlighting my perfect service record, the psychological pressure of the anniversary. But when I stood up, I didn't follow the script. "Colonel," I began, my voice calm. "The evidence presented is entirely accurate. I left my post. I destroyed property. I acted unprofessionally. I looked directly at the board. There are no excuses for that. I failed in my duty that day. And I am prepared to accept any punishment that corresponds with my actions." I didn't talk about Owen. I didn't talk about the letter. That was mine. I wouldn't use it as an excuse. I sat down. Silence filled the room. Jackson's hearing took place 2 days later in a juvenile court. A completely different atmosphere. Less formal, but just as tense. I was summoned as a witness, and the victim, Alistair Price's lawyer, was a master. He acknowledged Jackson's actions as a youthful mistake, but repeatedly hammered on my excessive and violent reaction. His plan was to frame Jackson as a kid who made a small error and was punished too severely. He handed Jackson a prepared statement to read to the court, a carefully polished apology. But when his turn came, Jackson didn't read it. He stood up, clutching the paper but not looking at it. "Your Honor," he began, his voice shaking slightly but firm. "What I did wasn't a mistake. It was a stupid and disrespectful act." Alistair Price frowned. His lawyer signaled to Jackson, but the kid ignored him. I didn't understand anything. I thought this was just a boring place, and I looked at Sergeant Thorne and just thought he was a soldier who did exactly what he was told. He paused for a second. I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong when I read his brother's letter. His name was Owen. The courtroom went quiet. I could feel Alistair's eyes on me, stunned. "That letter wasn't about war," Jackson continued. "It was about teaching his little brother how to drive, about being homesick. It made me realize that soldiers aren't statues. They're brothers and sisters and sons. And I disrespected their memory." He turned and looked directly at me for the first time since that day. "I'm sorry, Sergeant Thorne. I'm truly sorry." He sat down. The lawyer's prepared statement lay untouched on the table. In that moment, the outcome of the hearing no longer mattered. The kid had chosen the harder path on his own. He had told the truth. Jackson's confession didn't change the fact that I had breached protocol. The results of my hearing were announced the next day. The board didn't discharge me. It was a small mercy. But they officially reprimanded me and transferred me from the honor guard. Permanently. My duty at the dais was over. Hearing the verdict, I just felt empty. It was a heavy blow, a punishment that was fair but painful. The outcome of Jackson's trial was more complex. The kid wasn't let off the hook. The judge declared his actions were serious and could not be ignored. He received a suspended sentence, a year of probation, and was required to participate in a mandatory program, once a month for the entire year. He had to volunteer at the Veterans Center, the very place Mrs. Adeline Finch had spoken to him. I didn't gloat. No one really won here. We both paid a price. I thought it would end there. I packed my things, ready for a new assignment at a different base, a boring desk job, a quiet exile. But a few days before I was scheduled to leave, there was a knock on my door. It was Alistair Price, alone. He no longer had his usual air of confidence. He looked tired. "Sergeant Thorne," he began. "I'm not here as a lawyer or a CEO. I'm here as a father." I said nothing, just waited. "I didn't know about the letter," he said, "and I had no idea my son was going to stand up and say those things." He did all of that on his own. He looked out the window. "He's changed. This incident, it changed him. And maybe me, too." He turned back to me, and for the first time I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. "I'm not here to apologize for what he did. He did that himself. I'm here to thank you." I frowned. "Thank me? You could have destroyed him in court," he said. "You could have told your story about your brother to make him look like a monster. But you didn't. You accepted your own responsibility professionally. You gave him the chance to see his own mistake." He held out his hand. "Good luck with your new post, Sergeant." I looked at his hand for a moment, then shook it. It was a firm handshake. I never received a letter from Jackson. I didn't expect one. His apology was said where it mattered most. As I finished packing my footlocker, I found Owen's letter. I read it one more time. The words were simple, full of hope. Maybe I hadn't failed him after all. Maybe, somehow, his legacy wasn't just in my perfect steps. It was also in the change of a defiant kid, and in a father who finally saw his own son. I never returned to the eternal days as a guard. My new assignment was just as I predicted. Paperwork, reports, numbers. Necessary work, but soulless. My punishment wasn't a demotion, it was mediocrity. Occasionally I'd get updates on Jackson Price from Captain Evans. He kept in touch. The kid didn't just serve his sentence. He truly spent time at the Veterans Center. Not just to show up. He helped them organize records, clean, and most importantly, he sat and listened to the veterans' stories. He became a familiar face there. Our story, after it died down, became a lesson taught at the academy, not as a tale of heroism, but as a case study on discipline, pressure, and the limits of a soldier. My name and Jackson Price's were linked to a mistake, but also to a lesson. A year later, on the anniversary of Owen's death, I decided to go back to Meridian, not as a soldier. I wore civilian clothes, blending in with the tourists. I stood at a distance, looking towards the dais. A new sentinel was executing the walk perfectly. Everything continued, solemn and unchanged, as if I had never been there. And then I saw him, Jackson Price. The kid was standing in a corner, also alone. He was a little taller, thinner, and the restlessness was gone. He wasn't holding a phone. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, silently watching the guard. His gaze no longer held mockery or boredom. It held concentration, understanding, and a deep respect. He didn't see me. I had no intention of approaching him. There was nothing left to say. I stood there for a long time, watching the kid watch the sentinel. A strange circle had been closed. Owen's legacy wasn't in my thousands of perfect steps, the thing I had lost. His legacy, in a way no one could have predicted, was in the changed eyes of a boy who once threw a soda can, and maybe that was the truest legacy of all. One not carved in stone, but written into a person. I turned and walked away, feeling, for the first time in a year, a sense of peace.